So you're used to the mind games, the manipulation, the anger. But have you ever noticed what happens when the narcissist isn't winning anymore? When their lies don't land and their control starts slipping, and you stop playing along. That's when their behavior takes a sharp turn, sometimes explosive, sometimes pathetic, but always revealing. Because when the narcissist loses control, they show you exactly what they're afraid of. Today, I'm laying it all out for you because understanding these shifts can help you navigate the chaos before it pulls you back in. Welcome to the Common Ego community. My name is Christina, and I'm a toxic relationship recovery coach. And if you think you've had a relationship with a narcissist, I've got a free checklist that can help you see how your own experience stacks up with the phases of narcissistic abuse. And you'll find a link for that in the description. So when a narcissist loses control, the first thing you'll notice is that their rage becomes more intense and more frequent. So if you're here, I'm gonna guess that narcissistic rage isn't new to you. And maybe you've never heard quite that term before, but you've probably seen the behavior. Those cold, cutting remarks, the sudden outbursts designed to put you back in your place. These are things that when you know a narcissist, you may be all too familiar with. But when a narcissist starts losing control, their anger shifts from calculated to chaotic. And it can be downright scary to witness. At first, it might look like their typical outbursts, but the difference is in the intensity and the frequency. So suddenly, the smallest things set them off. So maybe you took an hour to respond to a text, or you didn't throw a parade in their honor when they took it upon themselves to do the dishes. Maybe it was even as simple as you being tired and not wanting to hang out in the moment. This is when you'll see their anger spilling out in ways that will make them look unstable. And this will be a subtle contrast to the angry outbursts they typically calculate for the purpose of keeping you in line. So very similar, but it's more unhinged. And this kind of rage, as you might have guessed, it isn't really about you, it's about fear. A narcissist relies on control like a lifeline. And when they feel it slipping through their fingers, they lash out in every direction, desperate to regain a sense of power. And the more you detach, the worse it gets. So if their anger starts feeling different, maybe more reckless or more erratic, it's not your imagination. It's a sign that whatever grip they once had on you is breaking, if only in that moment. But stand your ground. Their desperation is proof that you're exercising your right to exist as an independent human outside of their control. So in addition to rage, when a narcissist loses control, you're also going to notice that their lies start falling apart. If you've been dealing with a narcissist for any length of time, you already know lying is like breathing to them. They twist the truth, they rewrite history, and flat out fabricate stories to control the narrative. And for the longest time, they've probably gotten away with it. But when they start losing control, that's exactly when that carefully crafted web of lies starts to unravel. So at first, it might be little things. You might catch them contradicting themselves in ways they normally wouldn't. Maybe last week they swore they never said something, but today they're insisting they did, and you just forgot. Or maybe they're doubling down on an obvious lie, refusing to back down even when the truth is staring them in the face. And then on top of that, the cover-ups get sloppy. They're scrambling to keep their story straight, and as a result, they're gaslighting you with less finesse than usual. And they're blaming you for things that don't even make sense. The cracks are showing. And depending on how much pressure they're under, you might even see them rage out when their lies don't land the way they used to. And so here's the thing, a narcissist's entire sense of power depends on controlling the story. But when they're backed into a corner, when you're catching on, and when other people start noticing the inconsistencies, they're going to panic. They might even try to bury you in even bigger lies, hoping to confuse you into submission. We've all been in those circular arguments, haven't we? But listen, if you're noticing all of this is a good time for you to pause and pay attention, because it means their grip on reality, the one that they tried so hard to force you into, is breaking. And that's a power shift they don't know how to handle. So, yes, it can get scary when a narcissist realizes they're losing control. And I don't recommend sticking around for it if you can help it. So, do what you can to ensure your personal safety, but it's also super important to maintain your autonomy, which is something the narcissist will try very hard to take away from you. And if their efforts so far don't work and you continue pulling away or just setting your own boundaries to keep them from manipulating you, you might start to notice that they start love bombing you again. It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? Especially if you thought that love bombing was just for the beginning of the relationship. It's not. A narcissist's ideal world is one where you stay hooked, caught somewhere between their cruelty and their charm. And always, always second guessing yourself. So naturally, when they feel you slipping away, they pull out the same old tactics that worked in the past, hoping to reel you back in. And this can happen when you're in the relationship or even after the discard, or more dangerously, if you've ended the relationship first. And I won't spend too much time on that, but if that's where you are, don't look back. You will regret it. If you've ended the relationship first, stay out. But all of this is coming back around, and love bombing, this is what we typically call hoovering. This is when you've gotten away and they suck you back into their nonsense. Or at least they try. And maybe you've been here before and it felt calculated. Sometimes it does. But this time, it feels different. When the narcissist is losing control, the love bombing or hoovering feels rushed, maybe even desperate. Instead of that intoxicating high that they gave you in the beginning, there's a frantic edge to it. And here's the real danger in this. If you're still under the narcissist's spell, you'll be tempted to think that they're desperate to get you back because they miss you so, so much. And that's what they'll tell you too. But that's not what's happening here. You're actually seeing true desperation, but it's more like they're trying to patch up a sinking ship. Their sinking ship. Because without you under control, they lose a crucial source of validation. And if you don't take the bait, that is when the mask slips. The warmth vanishes, all that love bomby goodness goes out the window, and compliments turn to guilt trips. And before you know it, they're seething with resentment. And naturally, your head is left spinning because how can you go so quickly from here to here? It doesn't quite make sense. It doesn't even make logical sense. But if you understand a narcissist, it kind of does because you understand their motivation behind it. And what you end up seeing is like a child who didn't get their way. You see, the hard truth is a narcissist doesn't love you. They love what they can get from you. And when love bombing doesn't work, they'll switch gears fast. So that's why it's important to stand your ground. And when you do, if you're met with the love bombing or the hoovering and that runs its course and doesn't really work, that's when you'll start to notice that gaslighting becomes more obvious. So when a narcissist starts losing control, this is when you really notice the gaslighting. This is usually the point when you can identify, when you can look at that person and say, that is gaslighting, because it just becomes so obvious. So maybe their efforts used to be subtle, like planting seeds of doubt over time, which is usually what happens with gaslighting. And of course, they're making you wonder if you were too sensitive or if you really did forget that conversation they said you did. And at that stage, when it's super subtle, you're usually doubting yourself and you may not even be able to identify that gaslighting is happening. But at this point that we're talking about in this video here today, when the narcissist is scrambling to regain control, they're really likely to double down on all the things that have worked for them before. And in doing so, they can get a little sloppy. This is when the gaslighting becomes less convincing. So much like we talked about with love bombing, there's a desperation to it. So you may catch them contradicting themselves more often, shifting the goalposts mid-argument, or outright denying something they literally just admitted to. It's like watching somebody try to patch up a sinking ship with duct tape. It's frantic, it's messy, and it's full of holes. And here's where it gets even more obvious. When you don't immediately buy into their version of reality, they're likely to double down again. And what does that put us at now? I think quadruple down? I'm not sure. But they'll go even harder, repeating the same lie over and over, hoping to wear you down. Or maybe they'll get angry, accusing you of gaslighting them. Classic projection, by the way. But the more they fight to keep their illusion alive, the more transparent it becomes. And this is a pivotal moment because if you see through their manipulation in real time, that means their control over you is slipping. And let me tell you, they know it. So hold your ground, trust what you know to be true, and watch how desperate they become when they realize their grip on your mind is breaking. And then, in a natural progression, if the narcissist can't control you, they'll try to control how other people see you. This is when the smear campaign begins or intensifies. So if you've ever caught wind of the narcissist bad-mouthing you before, just wait until they start losing control. A narcissist's biggest fear isn't losing you, it's losing control over you. And when they sense that slipping, they'll do whatever it takes to regain the upper hand. That's when the smear campaign kicks into overdrive. So maybe they were already planting little seeds, subtly twisting the story to make themselves look like a victim. But now it's blatant. The lies get bigger. The accusations get more outrageous. Again, there's a sense of desperation behind this. And the way they talk about you shifts from subtle jabs to full-on character assassination. Suddenly, you're crazy and you're abusive. You're the one who can't let go. And the worst part is they'll say it with absolute conviction, making sure to get as many people on their side as possible. At first, it might feel kind of shocking, like, are they seriously saying this? But that shock is exactly what they're counting on. Because if you're busy defending yourself, you're distracted. If you're hurt and scrambling to fix your reputation, you're still in the game. And if you get sucked into proving them wrong, well, guess what? They're still controlling the narrative. But here's what you need to remember. The truth will reveal itself in time. People who actually know you will see through the act. And the ones who believe the narcissist were never really on your side to begin with. That's another hard pill to swallow. So let them talk. Let them twist the story. Because the louder they get, the more obvious it becomes. But when people do start realizing that the smear campaign is nothing more than a personal attack, that's when the narcissist will start playing the victim hard. So you may have gathered by now that a narcissist needs control. For some, that means being the center of attention, but for others, especially covert narcissists, it's more about carefully managing their image, staying just vulnerable enough to keep people hooked, and making sure they're always the most wronged person in any situation. And when they start losing control, that victim act, it goes into overdrive. At first, it might seem like their usual self-pity, the little sighs, the vague posts about how some people just don't appreciate them, or the quiet withdrawal that forces you to ask what's wrong. But the more desperate they get, the more obvious it becomes. Suddenly, they're always overwhelmed. They're always the one being treated unfairly. And they're always carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. And if you're close to them, this is a time to brace yourself because you are going to be the villain in their story. So maybe they start guilt-tripping you, bringing up everything they've done for you while conveniently ignoring all the ways they drained you dry. Maybe they tell mutual friends how cold you've become, how much they've tried, and how heartless you were to walk away. And if you call them out, that's just more proof of how cruel you are, at least in their eyes. But here's what you need to remember. A narcissist, especially a covert one, relies on being seen as the real victim. They know that as long as they can play the wounded, misunderstood soul, they can still control the story. But if you recognize it for what it is, manipulation wrapped in self-pity, you don't have to play along. Let them have their audience. You don't have to be part of the show. And so we've talked about a lot of desperate acts of desperation. But if none of that has worked so far, well, that's when they're going to burn it all to the ground. And this is when the narcissist starts burning bridges. Narcissists are really good at keeping people around when they want to be. So when they want those people around, they're good at keeping them there. So narcissists can be really good at building bridges, right? They can be really good at getting people to back them. But they are just as good at burning those bridges to the ground. And I would say they probably take equal satisfaction in both of those things. But the burning of the bridges usually comes when there are no other options. So how does this look from the outside? How do you know this is happening when you're seeing all this stuff unfold? So at first, you might notice little cracks in their ever-important image. So maybe they're lashing out more, pushing people away with erratic behavior, or complaining that everyone is against them. And there goes that victim mentality again. But when a narcissist feels that mask slipping, their ability to play the long game falls apart. So instead of subtly turning people against each other like they used to do, they kind of get reckless. So you might notice them talk badly about people that they once praised, cutting ties impulsively, and throwing full-blown tantrums when they don't get their way. This is especially true if you were their primary source of supply and you're pulling away. If they can't control you anymore, they'll either try to rally the remaining supporters against you, or they'll self-destruct, alienating even the people who are still on their side. Because at the end of the day, a narcissist's relationships aren't about genuine connection, they're about control. And when they feel that control slipping, they don't know how to hold on without completely destroying everything in their path. So if you're watching them burn bridges left and right, understand that this is just what happens when manipulation stops working for them. So let it all burn down. Just make sure you're sitting safely on the other side of that bridge when it happens. And then when all the bridges are burned and everything else fails, you might witness a full-blown narcissistic collapse. When a narcissist completely loses control, it's not just about lashing out, manipulating harder, or scrambling to keep you hooked, even though we talked about all those things, they do happen. But at some point, all of that stops working. And that's when you see something even bigger. A total collapse. And this is different from their usual theatrics, and you can tell. A narcissistic collapse is when they hit a wall so hard that their entire persona starts to crack. The grandiosity, the superiority, the carefully crafted image, it all comes crashing down under the weight of reality. And for someone who spent their entire life avoiding accountability, that level of exposure is unbearable. So at first it might look like a full emotional breakdown. Maybe they isolate themselves, or maybe they sink into a deep depression. And if they're more overt, this might get a little more interesting. They might spiral in a spectacular, dramatic fashion, which would include burning bridges, making reckless decisions, and throwing out wild accusations in a last-ditch effort to regain control. But if they're the covert type, you can expect full-on victim mode. So you might see tearful monologues about how the world is against them, exaggerated stories of betrayal, and a desperate attempt to get sympathy from someone, anyone who will listen. And here's what makes this collapse so dangerous. A narcissist without control is a narcissist with nothing to lose. Some will try to hoover you back in, some will go on a revenge campaign, and some will self-destruct entirely. And hey, listen, some may do all of the above at various points. But no matter how it plays out, one thing is for sure. The version of them you once knew is gone. What's left is the raw, exposed mess. And they can't handle the reality of their own downfall. So if you ever witness a narcissist in full collapse, don't get pulled into the wreckage. It's not your job to fix them, to soothe them, or to make sense of the chaos. Remember, this is chaos that they have created, and the only way out is for them to deal with it themselves. So just get as far away as possible, because when the mask is shattered, there's no telling what they'll do next. And if you're wondering the types of things that may leave a narcissist feeling like they're losing control, they can be a little more subtle than you think. But when their main supply, which may even be you right now, when their main supply begins to set boundaries and step outside of the narcissist's reach, it's a major blow to the narcissist's ego. And that can set all the things that we've talked about into motion, especially if it stays that way, if this is you and you stay out of reach. So ultimately, when you flip the script on a narcissist and regain some of your own power, you send the message that they can no longer control you. And for some key phrases that will do just that, click the video that just popped up on the screen. And before you go, hit the like button if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.